Welcome to Signal Black, a Darker Days series introducing and exploring the numerous Chronicles of Darkness second edition settings currently developed by Onyx Path Publishing. In this series, the hosts of Darker Days, alongside some Onyx Path writers, will discuss the settings and basic mechanics of each game, highlight the types of characters you can play, and explore the role-playing experiences each game provides. So, of course, I am Mike, one of the hosts of Darker Days Radio. And joining me is, of course, Chris Hanley, another host of Dark Days Radio.
Hello.
And for our Onyx Path writer of this episode, we have Chris Allen. How's it going, Chris?
Hello. Yeah, it's going well. Just a quick apology. I am using a laptop from my lap, so I do apologize if the camera is a bit wobbly.
No, man, people love shaky cam in movies these days, so it's all good.
It's a horror movie in the making, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, Chris, you have a ton of experience, and you actually have been on some Darker Days projects in the past, but I think this is your first time on for like a full interview episode. Unless maybe you did something with like maybe Dragon Con or
Chris has
UK Games Expo in the past.
Yeah, Chris has done some. I've been with Chris for some interviews. Right. Often not just me, generally often with someone else like Dave Brookshaw,
indeed.
Or Matthew Dawkins.
Great. So why don't we just get a little bit of street cred from you, Chris, about what kind of writing you've done and what games you're into.
Okay. Well, I mean, it all starts back in the early 2000s, where I did a bit of D20 work and then joined Mongoose Publishing for a little while as an editor and then a contributor on the miniatures wargame design side there. I sort of came back into the industry in terms of writing about 2014 when I joined the team designing Werewolf the Forsaken second edition. And since then, I've been involved in most of the second editions of Chronicles of Darkness games. I've done a little bit of writing for Vampire 5th Ed. I've done work on the various Trinity story path systems for Onyx Path, like Trinity Continuum, Eon, Aberrant. And I've done some work outside of Onyx Path for a few other companies as well. Places like Paleo Gaming's forthcoming Omega Horizon sci-fi game and a folk horror role-playing game, the forthcoming Solemn Veil as well.
Awesome.
Done a little bit of fiction writing as well around the edges. I recently had the first novella I've done published, which is a tie-in with Trinity, the Eon Continuum, Trinity Continuum Eon, called Meridian. And yeah, a few other bits and pieces like that.
Outstanding. Well, we're glad to have you here with your Werewolf the Forsaken experience, because that is what we're going to be talking about today. So let's just dive into the Signal Black for Werewolf the Forsaken with a quick little pitch about what the game is. In Werewolf the Forsaken, you play a werewolf, a being which is half human, has half a human soul and half of a wolf soul. And this allows your character to walk as a normal human, but also step into the spirit world and interact with that, giving it a very shamanistic and spiritual element, animist element to the game. In the spirit world, you can communicate with spirits, ghosts, demons, for example. And of course, you can transform both in the spirit world and in the real world, mortal world, into a wolf, a large wolf man, or anything in between, giving you a ferocious ability to hunt. And that is, in a nutshell, what Werewolf is and what you get to play as. So let's dive in a little bit deeper into what you can play in Werewolf Forsaken. So you are, of course, werewolves, sometimes called Uratha, which is there's a whole lexicon of like the first tongue in this game, which is pretty interesting. But everything also has other names as well, except for the auspices, I guess. But
the auspices just have full moon or whatever is there.
Exactly. That makes perfect sense. Yeah. But as well, the werewolves are called Uratha. They're also called the Forsaken. And in the past, they took over the ancient duties of Father Wolf and now patrol the gauntlets between the spirit world, also called the Shadow, and the mortal world, ensuring that harmony exists in between the two, usually through rather violent hunts, but not always as well. There can be definitely a diplomatic element. And of course, the reason why these werewolves are called Forsaken is because their ancestors were the wolves that killed Father Wolf because he was getting old and sick and could no longer lead the hunt, which is a very interesting little background element that kind of establishes some other things in the setting, which I'm sure we'll discuss as we go. So what can you play? Well, there's two core elements when you make your Forsaken character. The first that we were just talking about is the auspice. This is kind of the phase of the moon that your werewolf is associated with, and it represents their natural born affinities for hunting in the spirit world and also in the real world as well. Auspices can be a little strange to justify as like an acting society, but they make sense as a series of positions that kind of dictate how the Uratha, interact with or police the spirits. And to help people out with the auspices, I'll try to like include some story ideas at the bottom, and later on in the show, just kind of like explain and show how these different auspices can be used. So, all right, Chris, I'm probably gonna need some help with the pronunciations here, because I think there used to be actual pronunciation guides in the first edition. I didn't see it in the second edition as I was going through.
I think you might be right. I'm not sure the pronunciations are in the second edition.
Okay, but I'm going to pronounce the first one as Kahalith.
So the Kahalith is the gibbous moon. Yes.
Indeed. And these are the storytellers and lore keepers, kind of visionaries and prophets of each pack. And the Kahalith participate in the hunt to help remember and weave the tales of the pack and the individuals. And they also kind of track the oral history of the Uratha. So being as this is a society, a very, very loose society that exists between these different forsaken werewolves and the Uratha, this oral history is really how most things are recounted and how everything is remembered. So that makes them a pretty crucial member of the pack. And also gives, in some ways, I think they can kind of give like a moral grounding to the pack itself. Would you both Chris's agree with that?
Yeah, they do serve as one of the three really main roles that can be a spine to the pack, if you like. The gibbous moon is often the one who should theoretically have the wisdom and knowledge from what has come before to draw on and provide that to their fellows, to provide their fellows with a semblance of support and inspiration in particular. That's obviously not all they're about, but there is certainly that element to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And then next up, we have the Elodoth. These are the diplomats and the kind of arbiters of the group. And they're the quintessential wolf in sheep's clothing, able to negotiate with spirits, mortals, and other beings of the Chronicles of Darkness. But as always, the wolf must hunt, and the Elodoth can act as really a judge, jury, and executioner, enacting harsh reprisals with both fang and claw. So this is really it's kind of the social character in some ways. It definitely has a lot of gifts, which will gifts for people that are new to Werewolf the Forsaken are really a lot of your cool powers. Basically, you get them from the spirits and from the moon as well. They have a lot of each auspice has specific gifts associated with their phase of the moon that usually only they get, and they have a lot of things that help with social interaction, which gives them a lot of advantages there. Moving on from there, just to kind of pound through a couple of these auspices, we've got the Iraka, which are the stealthy scouts and spies. You'll see this in pretty much all of the Chronicles of Darkness games. There's always that stealthy splat, which I always enjoy seeing, like the Meket in Vampire, for example. And they are excellent at flushing out prey, using their enhanced senses and gifts to find offending spirits. And they can do a lot of things. They can kind of blend in. They can do reconnaissance. And probably more than other auspices, they can also hunt on their own using kind of standalone tactics, which I think makes them stand out as well. For the fourth auspice, we have the Ithair. Hopefully, Chris.
Ithar or Ithair. There's various pronunciations. That's exactly how you go.
Okay. So I'm going to go with Ithar. They're the occultists and spirit handlers. Ithar are the most shamanistic of all the Uratha werewolves. And while every werewolf has the gifts and such, the Ithar use these and their ritual rites to commune with spirits and even harness some of the spirits' kind of ephemeral abilities. So that is where they kind of stand out. Is they can influence, or even I think they can even control some spirits for limited amounts of time, which is pretty neat and useful. And for the final one, we have the Rahu, which are the warriors. Okay, so every single werewolf is a hunter, and that's really one of the standout things in Werewolf Second Edition is that theme that the wolf must hunt. But the Rahu are the type of hunter who lands that final decisive blow. While the rest of the pack may be harrying or nipping at the heels of whatever prey it might be, they're the one that really goes in there and goes for the neck, for example. And they're interesting as well because as the Ratha become more and more threatened by the say the gnawing rat hosts of the Beshalu or the inscrutable pure werewolves, the Rahu are increasingly kind of militarized. That's something you kind of see in some of the source books as well, especially like the War with the Pure, for example. And that's the 5 auspices, and they're all mapped to different phases of the moon. Rahu, we just mentioned, they're the full moon, for example, and we have gibbous moon, crescent moon, etc., half moon. And fans of Exalted, I think, will kind of recognize the kind of similarities between these and the solar exalts, which that really struck me as I was going back through, where they all kind of have these specific jobs. But more so than Exalted, I feel like the different auspices, they really just pertain to your interaction with spirits and the pack. It's not really like your job in a werewolf society, for example. So you can definitely have characters that branch out from their, say, their real world job, which is something that you might have to deal with in a werewolf game, and the auspice itself. I was just thinking up things like, you could have a Rahu who in their mortal life is just a janitor, basically, which might just give them a lot of access to, if maybe they're a night janitor, they could just sneak off and go on the hunt and then get back to, do whatever they have to, replacing a sump pump or something. Or you could have a Araka that's something very mundane, just maybe like a real estate agent. I really think that werewolves would, just from a story background standpoint, I don't know if you guys agree with this, if they have more freeform jobs without like a set structure or something like that, that definitely allows them to interact a lot more with the Chronicles of Darkness at large.
Yeah, it's very much a trade-off. In the first big Forsaken Chronicle I ran in first edition, the pack Rahu, the full moon, was a lawyer, which both had great advantages for the pack and great disadvantages for the pack, and for him personally at times when, both as a werewolf in a courtroom, trying not to lose his temper, but also in terms of the opportunities it opened up for the enemies of the pack to try and strike at them with different avenues. You're right that generally the more sort of freeform jobs or jobs that are easier to cloak werewolf activities under will make things easier for the pack, but as the trade-off, some of those jobs which are more limiting can come with better advantages in terms of supporting the pack outside of its actual
contacts and the like. Yeah, when I played Werewolf, I was a private investigator, right? Yeah. Which is pretty easy for any role-playing game to be, but it definitely worked out well.
Works very well for werewolves as well, who are very good at it. And it's one I've seen coming up in a few chronicles as someone choosing that as their background.
All right, good. I'm glad my character concept is so original. All right, so for Chris Allen here, got one big question for you, philosophical question. Is it okay if your werewolf pack doesn't have every auspice in it?
Yes, absolutely. The auspices are different approaches to the hunt. Essentially, it's how we sort of refined them in second ed. They all come with different sets of tools. Most gifts can be accessed by most werewolves more or less easily. The auspice gifts less so, but every werewolf pack can fight, regardless of if any of them are full moons. Every werewolf pack can negotiate with spirits, regardless of if any of them are crescent moons. What it does is it gives you real strengths across the board, across the full spectrum of approaches if you have all of them. But if you don't have all of them, there's no problem in setting. There's no many packs have multiples of one auspice or none of an auspice, and it's no problem out of character from an external meta side either. The pack will do just fine. Obviously, if you have multiples of the same auspice in a pack, you're probably going to want to look at how to design your characters so that they complement each other rather than necessarily stepping on each other's toes. So you can sort of share the spotlight round with with moment-to-moment play and in the group. But yeah, absolutely, you can have all manner of stacking up of different auspices, or you can have everyone with the same auspice. It's going to get a bit strange, and your group is going to be a hammer looking for a nail if they are all full moons, for example.
Yeah. I don't know. I was
But
just thinking.
that can be fun.
Yeah, I was just thinking, Chris. Maybe like a Elodoth. Everyone plays an Elodoth, and you're like a werewolf law firm, for example. It could work. It could be a thing.
And one thing as well is that, which we're going to get to, is the tribes encourage different approaches. Yes. So we'll get to that in a minute. But for example, your Blood Talon full moon is your classic, ravening frontline warrior. Right. Bone Shadow full moon may be a spirit warrior, someone who is very much about combat, but learning eldritch and occult approaches to it, that still weird out the other werewolves. So that is another layer of how to complement each other within the pack, and have different same auspice in different forms.
Yeah, and I think it is a great time to start talking about the tribes a little bit.
Yeah,
because we discussed the auspice, which is really kind of how the werewolf was born, we can say. But the tribe is really what they get to choose. So, Chris, do you want to cover that?
Yeah, sure.
Chris,
I was just gonna finish off with the fact that, again, for people that are new to this, is that the auspices, again, if you've played other games that have classes or things like that, again, you're going to build your character first as a human. So they're going to have a job, a life, a profession. So that combined with the auspice, combined with tribe, gives you enough should give you enough variety. So you have that. So that should break up and make duplications of a particular auspice or the lack of a particular auspice not a hindrance, really. If anything, more of an opportunity to explore those elements more deeply. But tribes, yes. So tribes, I would say, are when you read them, they're a philosophy to how you hunt. They're not tied to any particular region, ethnic group, or religion. If you are obviously familiar with another game that begins with werewolf, which we have to acknowledge is out there, and this is obviously a spiritual successor remix of. We don't have those issues, which is a good thing as well. I will say personally, it is a good thing we don't have that. So each tribe is tied to a totem spirit, one of the first pack of Father Wolf. So these are great wolf spirits, and that again gives them access to particular gifts and gives them their kind of philosophy of hunting. So the tribes we have, and this is going to be very brief, just to give you a flavour of them because there is more to them. Each tribe has, in the book, I'm going to hold this up. Whoa, you can't really see, but basically has also a list of myths. So we don't have a singular monomyth. We have multiple myths within the society of the Aratha about, where the tribe comes from or who Father Wolf was, and so forth. So that also adds some mystery to the game and some points of discussion between the players. Sorry, the Blood Talons, they hunt other werewolves. That is their particular specialization, and of course those other werewolves could be rogue packs of their own kin, of the Forsaken, but also predominantly the pure tribes, who are also werewolves who are not blessed by Luna with gifts because of the what's happened within the long history of werewolves. So the Blood Talons focus on hunting other werewolves, but that means that they're very martial. They're they have to be precise, and I guess that comes from the fact that if you're going to hunt other werewolves, you're hunting a pack, and that means within a pack there's going to be people who are specialists, people whose abilities complement someone else. So Blood Talons have the philosophy that you have to pick that apart, almost in a very surgical way, in order to bring your prey down. Then we have the Bone Shadows. Their preference of hunting is spirits and ephemeral beings. So that also covers things like ghosts, other types of spirits which come from other realms that aren't the shadow or the Hyssal. And so they have to understand how those spirits are able to reach across from other realms and interact with ours, and how our world interacts with those other realms, because a spirit will act through reaching through, finding resonances. So that means a Bones Shadow has to be quite aware in a more holistic sense of what's going on in the world around them, in order to figure out why things are going wrong and track down these beings that are not tangible entities. Then, and also related to that, that means they're going to also, if you're fighting spirits in that sense, you're going to be looking for their weaknesses like bands, and that also goes across onto things like ghosts, where you're going to find their weakness, which will be a not a fetter, an anchor or some such. Hunters in darkness, sorry, they hunt the host. So they Hunter in Darkness have this philosophy that they need to also maintain their territory, but that kind of makes sense when you consider their predominant prey, which is the host. So these are the shard spirits. So they were once great spirits like Father Wolf that have been broken down into these smaller spirits that, if they conglomerate and grow and spread, become more dangerous foes. And the reason why they protect the territory and focus in that way is, if you're going to defeat the Aslu or Balshos, so the rat hosts or the spider hosts or other hosts, there are other ones in other books, you need to not just kill one, you need to obliterate, you need to basically purge the area. And so that's why they're quite bothered by how they protect their territory and how they zone in and herd the enemy into a kill zone and take them out that way. Then we have the Iron Masters. They focus on humans. And you might go, why humans? Well, humans are creatures that, well, they don't have a spiritual reflection in the Hissel. They do things which cause the balance between the spirit world and our world to go off. And that's what causes spirits to go mad, and you get spirits spilling over. So there again, I think they kind of work quite well in tandem with the Bone Shadows in that sense. But that also means Iron Masters take it upon themselves to go after the other human-looking enemies, which aren't spirits. So we're talking your vampires, we're talking your mages, your changelings, your Prometheans, etc. Because those bastards will do things for their own machinations, and that will cause, again, an imbalance in the spirit realm. So, if your vampires predating on a particular place, that's going to cause a particular essence to grow of murder and blood, and there's going to be spirits feeding upon that, and soon enough you've got a spirit that's breaching into our world that is made of knives. Then we have Stormlords. So they hunt a particular amalgam of spirit and human called the Ridden or Spirit Claim. So what happens is that a spirit will possess someone, and if they hold on to them long enough, there's a merger that occurs. So they're, in some ways, a perverse reflection of what a werewolf is, which is also an amalgam of a wolf spirit and a human. It also means you don't know who they are if they're still in that just a human doing weird things. They could be anyone. So there's a bit of nice overlap with the Iron Masters in that sense as well, and with the Bone Shadows. And because of this, the Stormlords are quite cautious and aware of what they're hunting. They have to really almost be pinpoint accurate on who it is and what's going on before they move in, because also that spirit could hop to another person, and you want to catch it before it even does that. And then finally we have Ghost Wolves. So that's really where you've got a werewolf that's not belonging to a tribe, and therefore their philosophy of their hunt is perhaps more personal. Now, personal, that may mean in a broad sense, like they just hate vampires and they want to take them all out for whatever personal reason. Or they're rather focused and they're going after a particular person or organisation. And so that's what frames their hunt. And that's the tribes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they were really strong in second edition. The change to make them focus on a particular thing that they do hunt is just ingenious, really good. One thing I do want to bring up with the Ghost Wolves is I don't think it's really in the books, but the way I've always seen it is they can also function as like kind of a period of transition between, as a werewolf kind of moves from one tribe to the other. Especially that makes sense in second edition as they kind of change their kind of philosophies and hunting styles. That's a really good way to just model that kind of transition state for them.
And I was going to say, it's like with the tribes again. I guess you can quite happily have all members of the pack be a member of a tribe. That represents the fact they've all been brought up within a particular philosophy, or at some point, I guess, pack members will have perhaps been indoctrinated into a pack at one point through a philosophy, and then at a later date, they have left said pack because it broke down, or they were expected to leave and join a new pack. I don't know, Chris.
Yeah.
Your opinions then on mixes of tribes within the game, and how that really, I guess, works for players.
Yeah, I think the assumption generally is that a pack is going to have multiple tribes represented in it. They are not allegiances or factions in a conventional form, like you say. They're more like philosophies, different philosophies within a broader church, essentially. And while werewolves are often drawn to them personally for specific reasons, because the philosophy of the hunt that tribe embodies appeals to them. So they might think the martial brotherhood of blood talons and the militaristic approach they espouse is how they think it should be done, or they may be coming to it for personal reasons. So it might be that a werewolf killed their family, so they think the most dangerous prey is werewolves, got to stop them, or it may be because they're about personal goals. A werewolf might believe that the only other prey ever worth really bothering with, that's worth glory in any way, is a werewolf, because all other prey pales in comparison. So they choose the blood talons because they think that's really their goal, their ambition. The thing they want to do is fight the biggest prey, and who's bigger than a werewolf, as it were, who's more important than a werewolf. What that means is that generally inside a pack, you'll have all the different characters with their different agendas, their different backgrounds, their different viewpoints will suit different tribes in different ways. And while not every pack is going to be a kind of rainbow spectrum of different tribes, it's very common that there is a mixture of tribes in a pack in the setting, especially because to a certain extent within Forsaken society, there is an understanding that these tribes are almost, they make you a specialist in the thing. They make you really good at some stuff. So if there is serious spirit shenanigans going on, sure, every werewolf can kind of deal with that, but you probably want to look to the Bone Shadows for guidance, because they're the spooky bastards who know the best about what the hell's going on. If you want to deal with a host infestation, the Hunters in Darkness are the ones with the best tricks for how to nail the bastards down, corral them up, and kill them all off without any escaping. One thing, and again, we'll touch on this in a moment with lodges. Lodges changed a lot in one of these supplements for Second Ed, the pack, which I'll get to when we get to that section. But those are more like even more focused specializations of the same thing. So from that point of view, in the setting, while on the one hand, people will naturally you might find in a pack they're only gravitating to one or two tribes in general, and that's fine. That kind of mixing is fine. There's no problem with mixed tribes. There's no expectation of single tribe packs. And from a meta point of view, playing the game, having that mixture on the one hand gives the pack more tools for dealing with the hunt, but also when you have overlap inside the pack, if you have two people who are blood talons, then the differences between them in how they interpret that philosophy can be important. If you have two blood talons in a pack where the rest are Iron Masters, those two guys are probably more likely to have one another's back in certain strategic things when it comes down to certain bits of pack tactics. But at the same time, they might also grate against one another in the hows and whys of why they chose to be blood talons.
Indeed. The other great thing about how the tribes are set up now is that as a player, it gives you a way to kind of tell your storyteller what you want to see in the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're really interested in fighting against the pure, that sort of thing, or dealing with even just the social aspects of dealing with the pure, making your character into a blood talon and kind of putting that, bold underline right there and talking to your storyteller about it is a great way to kind of influence where the game is going. And then if you're a storyteller running Werewolf the Forsaken, this also gives you an opportunity to player that maybe isn't getting enough interaction, that sort of thing. If you have a quiet player who is always dealing with, let's say, who is a let's say a storm lord dealing with Ridden and the spirits, well, then you have one of those kinds of antagonists show up, and then they have the most tools to interact with it. So it's just really good all around. Cool. So should we talk about lodges a little bit?
I was just going to finish that there's obviously one prey we haven't spoken of as we went through those, because there's one prey which doesn't fit any of the tribes, which I'm trying to remember what they're called, what the term is. I know what they are.
Gam?
The Idgum, yes, which is, I guess, the default Chronicle setup for second edition.
Yes, it was obviously the way that the books were being titled changed a bit early on, but yes, it's the Idigam Chronicle.
And I guess we're going to talk about that when we talk about the spirit adversaries, because the Idigam are completely bonkers mad creatures to face. But yeah, like what can we we're going on to. Are we going to say much more about lodges then, Mike? You've got a few that you want to pick out, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's just good to highlight. And I haven't read the pack, so Chris, you can give us an update. I don't think let's see if my original definition here that I had written down is still holds true, but kind of regional, regionalized organizations that Urartha characters may belong to, and these lodges are usually for specific auspices. Others are for specific tribes, and some are just unaffiliated. So kind of just a catch-all of mechanical benefits if you want to join one of these lodges and, go with their philosophy. Does that still hold true in the pack?
Some of it, yes.
Okay.
What we did in the pack is we got to the fundamentals of what makes a lodge a lodge. In first edition, they were quite all over the place in terms of not just concept, but in terms of what they were fundamentally. Sometimes there was a bit of an issue of the lodge of what I was going to do anyway, by which I mean sometimes they felt a bit like prestige classes. I'm a very strong warrior, so I'm going to join this pack. Lodge, sorry, not pack. Now, in second ed, while we were doing the design of the core book, I had some very strong ideas about what lodges should probably be, but there wasn't the time or space to really explore that in the core, and I wasn't working on that particular bit. The first supplement, the pack, was when I was let off the leash and allowed to do what I wanted. So what lodges have become in second edition is they are refinements of the hunt, and they are cults. Very specifically, they are those two things together. Lodges are not normal. They're not sane, healthy, or balanced in any way. That doesn't mean they're evil or wrong necessarily, but they are always kind of weird, because if you're joining a lodge, you are joining a fraternity of werewolves who have pledged themselves to yet another spirit lord to refine the hunt further, whether that is refining the nature of the prey or refining the method of the hunt. They always have secrets. They always have things they don't want outsiders to know. They are lodges. They're not open fellowships. They're picky. They're selective. They're weird. At the same time, some of them have a role in Urartha society. For example, the Lodge of Death, who particularly focus on undead as prey. They are often also viewed as priests by other Urartha, specifically referring to death and things around that. To some extent, they are tolerated in terms of their dealings with the dead, because they're the ones who you want most to be dealing with, one of your fallen kindred, for example. The Lodge of Garm, who are particularly vicious killers, are also the best at hunting elder pure, the most terrifying pure werewolves. That's what they have focused on. They will live and they will die dueling the greatest pure they can find. But that wins them a certain amount of respect in wider society for their expertise and their specialization. What we've scrapped largely is we ditched the idea of auspice and tribe affiliations. Lots of lodges have predominant recruitment from a given tribe. So the Lodge of Death largely recruits from the Bone Shadows, but they also recruit from Blood Talons. For example, in some parts of Eastern Europe, if you look at werewolf legends, they are heavily tied up in vampire legends, to the point where a vampire is what you get when a werewolf dies and the remains aren't dealt with appropriately. So you have a bunch of Blood Talons who believe that is essentially the case, and that vampires crop up because of problems with werewolves, in fact. You get that kind of meshing and mingling, but they're these They are these transgressive cults. They are full of secrets they want to hide, but in return you get power. They are full of new limited. You willingly take on spirit bands, and you willingly take on a duty to a new brotherhood of werewolves in return for their expertise, their tools, and greater spiritual power for the purpose you want. So they're not exactly a devil's bargain, but they are much more involved in the setting, much more involved in the obligations you take on to spirit and werewolf, and they're a bit more anchored and concrete than they used to be in that respect, and more part of a horror game than being prestige classes, if you get what I mean.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And that's a huge improvement. That's really exciting to hear about. There are a lot of really cool lodges in first edition, but there's also some ones that don't have, they're kind of bland, you know. So definitely having those kind of secrets and further integration, I think, is really good. To kind of play off of the two lodges that you just mentioned, I did find two that I really liked as I was going back through. One is the Lodge of the Praetor. This is from first edition again, so it will probably change. But they're kind of these packs which are extrajudicial, and they travel through different territories, and they go around judging other Uratha. And that means they might aid a pack that they think is good and maybe is struggling in some ways. But if they found them wanting, they might punish them or even just try to kill the other pack. So I think that's pretty interesting. And the Lodge of the Carrion is another pretty cool one, which is patronized by the Hungry Buzzard. And these are kind of scavengers and opportunists that look for dead loci, which are the places of power where werewolves usually congregate. And they try to find ancient relics, fetishes, and the like, or forgotten access to the spirit world. And they strip what they can find, and then they move on. So what I kind of want to highlight with this, and what Chris was talking about, is that there's over 100 lodges at this point. There's tons of them. And they have a lot of extra optional ideas for Werewolf the Forsaken, both as a player and as a storyteller, because as a storyteller, you can use a lot of these as inspiration for antagonist Forsaken themselves, which I think is definitely a cool way to go. Awesome. Anything else for lodges?
Not really. I think that covers it.
I think the only thing I would say, and another thing in second ed, is that lodges is also a bit of design space we've used to expand much more out into werewolves who do not belong to the two main factions, the Pure and the Forsaken. The pack, for example, holds lodges for the Eaters of the Dead, who are a Ghost Wolf lodge, and for the Temple of Apollo, who are also a Ghost Wolf lodge, who may be worshipping an evil spirit in the sun. They start going down, because lodges can do weirder stuff now because of the way they're built. They serve as quite a good sort of structure spine to build ghost wolf stories around, because you can have ghost wolves who are just independent werewolves, but you can have these groups who aren't one of the two known groups with weird powers and weird agendas showing up.
Very interesting. Very, very neat. I like it. I like it a lot. So let's talk about what you can do. And again, the overriding principle of Werewolf the Forsaken second edition is that the wolf must hunt. So let's talk about hunting spirits and hunting hosts. So, you know, werewolves have territory. We'll kind of talk about territory as a game concept a little bit later. But usually what you hunt is the primary thing you're going to be dealing with. For the hosts, there's two key ones that are in the core rulebook and have been in first edition and second edition. And that is, of course, the Beshaloo, which are the rat hosts. And these were formed in the very early world after the Uratha shattered the Rat King, and his shards still exist, basically as the Beshaloo, these horrific rats that would be crawling under human skin, growing inside of people, and then seeking to, well, after they burst out of a person, seeking to combine the shards once more and try to recreate that Rat King. And these rat hosts they're sentient. You know, there is a way for Uratha to interact with them, but they are these kind of a chaotic, chittering horde, bursting forth from those mortal hosts. And they're very fractious, right? They have these kind of like heresies and other disagreements that kind of exist in between them, which gives you some space to kind of deal with different forms of this rat host.
They're very Skaven.
A little bit, yeah.
Let's be honest. There's quite a bit of Skaven horror. Let's be honest. If we as a tangent, like Skaven can be shown as being quite comedic enemies, but having written for a particular book where they were the antagonists, the aim was to actually also make sure Skaven rat men
Yeah.
are scary. Like the very essence of what a rat is, like the things we think, the horrific elements of rats, like cannibalistic and eking out an existence in filth. And when you combine that with mutation, which I think the Becheloux have that good element of, where you combine rat
Absolutely.
elements with people, and I guess that gets you into things like other bits of cinema and media where you've got anthropomorphic rat people. They're creepy as fuck. I
They
do
are.
like the idea of people like antagonists that have been hollowed out by the Becheloux spirits and are basically walking skin sacks filled with rats, or is a walking skin sack with a merged big rat spirit creature thing. That's particularly gross. And their thing is like they gnaw at the wall between worlds. They're weakening the wall between our world and the Hissel, which of course then causes all other madness to spill out into our world.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're a real hassle for the Uratha, right? Because they want to try to keep things pretty stable. That's kind of their purpose and their calling from the moon itself. And yeah, the chaos and destruction of the Becheloux really is a problem for them, a huge nuisance. As well, kind of the opposite of the Becheloux are the Aslu, which are these small little spiders which might just crawl down your throat at night, and then maybe get up through your nasal passageways into your brain and start eating away, then slowly consume you and eventually turn you and maybe some other people as well into a giant spider creature, which kind of weaves its metaphysical webs to strengthen the gauntlet, which actually can be a problem. Fewer spirits are getting through, but that can also limit the Uratha's access to the spirit world, which they need to get to quite often, and it could be limiting that access at very inopportune times as well, which is definitely a good way to leverage the Aslu as a storyteller. And to make matters worse, eventually the Aslu will probably be like a giant car-sized spider that exists somewhere in your city, out in the woods, in a cave, wherever it may be. And it needs to constantly eat humans. So that's not good either. And that can definitely upset the spirit world as well, with all of the death going on every single night. So it's the Becheloux and the Aslu, which I've always thought of as like the coolest antagonist. Oh, I like the Pure too. There's a lot of great antagonists in any werewolf game, but those two always really stood out to me as being very well defined for the werewolf game, and just very easy to use as a kind of long-term or mid-term antagonist for a chronicle. And aside from the hosts, we of course have other spirits, and we have the Ridden, which could be individuals that are possessed by spirits and other things. And traditional spirits in the game can be all sorts of manifestations. Werewolf is in animistic games. That means that everything has a spirit associated with it somehow. So you could have spirits of ideas or concepts or memories in some ways. For example, like you have a spirit that's a manifestation of a serial killer's murders. Or if you want to crossover, Chris, it could be the manifestation of a slasher's murders from Hunter the Vigil, which could be pretty fun. You can have the personification of pollution, or you could even have the spirit of filthy bus stops in your game or something like that. So it can go really all over the place. And these spirits could be upset by, say, the Aslu locking them on one side of the spirit world and they can't get back. Or it could be upset by some sort of a change that mortals are enacting in the world. And it's up to the Uratha to help deal with these things. And I also like that, actually, this is kind of harkening back to the Aslu and to the Becheloux. We don't see tons of giant spiders running around and chittering hordes of rats everywhere, which in the context of the Chronicles of Darkness seems to mean that the Uratha are doing a pretty good job. So I've always kind of enjoyed that. People wonder like, well, what about the masquerade or the veil? How are these things not spilling over? And it's like, oh, they're doing a good job. Okay job, which I've always kind of enjoyed. So, anything else with spirits or hosts from you two? Any kind of highlights
Yeah.
you want to bring forward from your own games
I
or
think
anything like that?
one of the things that really is important to how spirits work is that spirits are hungry. They are monomaniacal reflections of the real world, and they are hungry. And how they feed is through resonance, which is what they are spirits of being reflected in the real world. So a spirit of flame might be born by a fire in the real world, and it then wants more fire. If it doesn't get more fire, it will slowly starve to death. And this is one of the drivers why spirits war with each other. They consume each other for resonance, why they don't like the werewolves getting in their way, stopping them feeding on things they want to do, and why they want to get into the world of flesh, the real world. That fire spirit, if it's surviving on a few trash can fires, in some back alley, it's not happy, it's not fed, it's weak, it's feeble, it wants to be strong, it wants to sometimes maybe get into the real world, possess somebody, make them set fires so that it will be well fed. Sometimes spirits flee to the world of flesh because of other spirits trying to eat them, because there isn't enough food for the other spirits around, so they may flee there. But often they're coming over to meddle, and they don't care about they're not really able, unless they're very powerful spirits, to care about more moral concepts, because they're hungry. The lower spirits are quite simple. Even the more powerful spirits don't really understand why they shouldn't do what they do. So from one of my games, an example is one of the pack got very badly injured, so badly injured that even their enhanced regeneration couldn't, was struggling. The pack needed their frontline fighter up and running again as quickly as possible. So they went, we shall find a spirit of healing. Where will we find a spirit of healing? In a hospital. So they went to the shadow reflection of a hospital. The place was a war zone between the spirits of disease and plague and healing, spirits of surgical tools and fear and hope, or the absolute clusterfuck. But they eventually found the most powerful spirit in the hospital, which was the spirit of the hospital's healing. And they asked it. They said, "Great spirit, please help us. Please heal our packmate." And the spirit considered it. And spirits have a thing. They can't do something for nothing. They're not able to do something for nothing. You must bargain with them. They're not capable of doing otherwise. And they say, "Well, what do you want to heal our packmate?" And the spirit ponders and says, "I want you to go out and hospitalize a lot of humans." I can't remember that number, but because a spirit of healing is nothing without injured people to heal. So you have these spirits, even of supposedly benign concepts, who only care about that concept and its continuation. Spirits of joy who don't understand why possessing someone and driving them to heights of rapture could ever be a bad thing. They're spirits of murder who think murder is obviously just the best thing in the world and everyone should be murdering each other. And that's really where the conflict with spirits comes through. They are these alien beings that are reflections of the real world, but they want their thing above all else.
I also really like the fact that spirit predation obviously follows natural cycles that we understand. So a fox spirit will feed upon prey spirits that a fox naturally hunts. But then you get the weird things when a powerful spirit decides to go, I'm hungry, and so hungry that it feeds on spirits that it shouldn't be devouring. When a car spirit goes off and devours, say, say a car spirit devours like the spirit of a lion because there's a zoo. That's not a natural cycle of how things should work, and so the resultant spirit is a Magath, which is a horrific amalgam, and then that is going to lead to imbalance in the spirit realm and thus in the real world.
Something else that is worth noting, people think about the horror aspect of it. Sometimes people say, so you have these spirits, they're all running around and talking. Oh, I think I might have just dropped off my video. Sorry. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, don't worry.
Yep.
Okay, I'll press that in and see if I pop back up. Do you have these spirits of talking cars going around? Isn't that a bit silly? The way spirits appear is very symbolic and ephemeral, can be very weird. So you might have a car-like entity that is talking, but it is as much beast as car, with muscles of rippling piston, grill teeth. It may have looked more like something spider-like rattling along with an engine of of monstrous proportions. But the Magath, who occur when spirits eat one another that shouldn't, as you're saying, just look completely bananas. They look absolutely weird and strange and bizarre because they are any given spirit. You can usually look at it, and even if it looks horrific and wrong, you can understand what it's a spirit of. But Magath lose that kind of definition to them, and violate sort of everything. You violate the presence of the shadow around them because they're just not meant to be.
Cool. And then obviously we've got the pure, which we're gonna, looking at time, we're gonna cover quite briefly. So the pure essentially are the other werewolves. They're the larger faction. I remember in first edition they still are the larger faction.
It's less defined. It's less sort of set in second edition.
Yeah.
They in some places there are more of them, in some places there are less. It varies a lot.
But because of the history, mythology, and so forth, they are, while they're not forsaken as the other werewolves are, their ties to lunar moon spirit is very different, so they don't have access to certain gifts. So that means because of their relationships, it means they have a better kinship with spirits in that they're not forsaken by the other spirits because they don't align with killing Father Wolf. But that also in terms means they don't get Luna's blessings. So again, it's a philosophical thing really between them and the Forsaken about where they fit in the world and if they have to keep the balance between the two worlds and how they interact with spirits.
Yeah. Pure fit a bit more closely some of your horror werewolf tropes. They tend to be much more straightforward horror antagonists, either because they don't care about all of the things that the Forsaken will care about on their territory, the people, the communities, or because the agendas they are serving are so alien or monstrous. So they're very much set to be antagonists.
And they're quite creepy. I mean, one of them is also like almost evangelical kind of religion in the way they operate, and another one kind of just essentially revels in the pure horror of the spirit world and being the monsters that they are. So there's also quite a lot of there's broad themes to explore in there. So you also kind of get some ecclesiastical horror with respect to the mythology and faith of werewolves and how they interact with the spirits and Father Wolf and so forth. And then I guess really quickly Idegum, because that's obviously was a feature of second edition when it was originally known as the Idegum Chronicles. So Idegum are the ancient spirits, like mega spirits we'll call them, that were banished by Father Wolf to beyond Earth. So we're going to say Luna and possibly beyond. And they, unlike other spirits, have no set form. They're rather chaotic in that sense, and they didn't return to the world until basically they hitched a ride on spirits that were able to travel between the worlds. So in other words, rocket ships and satellites and so forth. And now they're back on our world and they're causing hell because obviously Father Wolf isn't there to keep them in check, and they don't follow the rules of other spirits as the Aratha know them. So they are really quite not Cronenberg. I was going to say, you get the horror of like The Thing and so forth with them. They're very body horror, shape shifting, and their weakness really comes into play when they do begin to coalesce on a particular form.
Yeah. The Idegam are one of the things the book does, which I'm careful to lay out in there, is that there's a lot of possibilities as to what they are, and no one actually knows. They may be literal raw chunks of creation that never coalesced into concepts. They may be proto-spirits, or they may be proto-wolves. Whatever they are these twisting melanges of chaos. But when they enter the world again, having been returning from their exile. When they enter the world, they have a pressure on them to coalesce into a form, and that form generally makes no sense. Even then, it's generally warped and twisted. They have bizarre powers, as you said. They don't follow the rules of the spirit world. They're something from an older age, but they have, and because they're so powerful, their specific weaknesses are very important, and those are generally tied to the how and where of their coalescence. The place in the world they were when finally the metaphysical pressure from reality to be a thing rather than trying to be everything folded them into a single point. But the problem is that unlike a lot of other spirits where the weaknesses are fairly easy to figure out, like a fire spirit is probably vulnerable to water, there's no simple answer like that for Idagam. It's very hard to find out their weaknesses.
Yeah, they're pretty, because of that, it makes them, I think they are like a really strong enemy in antagonist in second edition. I think in first edition, a number of entities like them. Oh, was it them, or were they the? I can't remember. There was like the worms, the giant worm spirit in Predators, and there was one which was kind of like a gaseous kind of invisible mist type creature. There were a few there. They're all quite varied. I can't remember if they were Idagam or they were basically just considered, they were called something like...
There was a mix. There was Idagam, and then there were sort of ancient horrors that weren't quite understood. Yeah. That's still the case in modern werewolf. There are weird things that don't easily fit into the werewolf cosmology. But yeah, the Idagam now have been given much more prominence, given rules in the core, whereas in this first edition, it took them quite a long time to be given rules, even though they were mentioned as an element of the setting. Yeah. Whereas now we've put them front and center. Your Idagam is generally likely to be maybe a chronicle villain, if you know what I mean, not a minor thing you just kick a head in off. It's going to be a big deal if it turns up. They tend to be a bit like a natural disaster hitting in their impact. They're always significant.
Yeah. Right. I guess we then, Mike, we go into kind of like what we can explore and like really a bit of how the game operates. I know we're running a bit over time and I want to kind of wrap up, so this isn't like exploring thing, but I guess what this gets into what makes Werewolf a bit more novel is that I would say there's a greater element, there's a greater chance to explore and define the pack in second edition. So it's not just your werewolves you play, there are your kinfolk and other people that you consider part of your pack, and that can actually be quite broad and even encompass characters who aren't werewolves or kinfolk or mortals. I mean, someone could be in your pack who potentially could be a gangrel vampire, and I think that's quite an interesting way the game has gone.
Yeah. Do we use the term kinfolk, or is it only wolf-blooded?
They are wolf-blooded.
It's wolf-blooded. That's the one.
Indeed. Yeah, and they've wolf-blood have definitely been really expanded as well, I believe, with some of the additional supplements. So yeah, the pack is important, and in a lot of werewolf games, and this doesn't have to be the case, but territory is very important. And this can take a lot of different forms. You could have, the kind of territorial zero-sum game between both your pack, other Uratha packs, other Forsaken packs, or pure packs as well, who may be, in some sort of a pact or deal with some sort of a malevolent spirit to kind of, have a more wild area as part of the city or something like that. Territory is very important. First edition didn't have very good support for it until the Territories sourcebook came out. Chris Allen, how do you feel the current support is for Territories and kind of modeling that in your games in second edition? Is that good right now?
I think it's better partly because we looked at it from maybe a more foundational level. There's more that can be done to it in terms of support, certainly, but there's plenty in the core to run with. Territories is less about the importance of territories, less about a mechanical unit of like these are the specific things that are in your territory, and more about. So Werewolf is a game of boundaries and lines. It's about, there's the lines between you and your pack and everyone else, your tribe and everyone else. It's about the line between your territory and what's yours and what isn't. And it's about blurring those lines as well. So territory is one of the hard lines for elves. A lot of supernatural powers they have access to key off or relate to that. A lot of that sort of stuff hangs off that. There's gifts that are more powerful if used in your territory. The core sacred rites that werewolves use to empower themselves rely on these concepts. But from a purely narrative point of view, it's very central in terms of it's not just a bunch of elves, it's you and other people allied to you and the communities around you in your territory. It's about the places that you as a group have decided to define as yours, and this side of the line is under our protection, or this side of the line is our hunting ground, outside is not. So what you often get in games is a lot of inter-pack conflicts or interactions with getting the territory you want because of the things your characters care about, what other packs want, where you can come to compromises, and obviously the hard lines where you can't. Werewolves are naturally quite violent creatures, partly because they regenerate from even horrific injuries, so it's fairly easy to be that. But it does mean that the idea of territory, the idea of these lines, are often drawn in blood, because that's a language that all werewolves can communicate very adeptly in. And I think the game gives werewolves the tools they need to do that. What you're not going to find is a territory micromanagement system, mechanical system. It's not going to be in there. But what the second ed has done now is anchor packs more conceptually in something more than just the immediate ring of werewolves. We've expanded the concept. I think that gives them a better placing in their territory as well.
Awesome. Yeah. I like it.
I think when you combine it with, say, a classic book like Damnation City, then I think the way Werewolf is set up, and so long as you get players, I think, depending upon your group of players, you're either going to be able to, your mileage of this is going to differ. Either you're going to need to string together a stronger plot for them to follow for your chronicle, or if they're quite a proactive group and players who are willing to take risks and pay an interest into what their characters are doing and what their family are doing and their job, etc., then you've mostly got a group that you can utilize that the core concept, and it's mostly a bit more towards the sandbox side of things, and therefore you can litter within it lots of hooks while also placing within it the seeds of the grander arc that you want to explore. And you really run a bit of that before.
The characters to interact with the territory in a way. You want the territory to have its own. When I say character, I don't mean a character sheet, but being an individual. I mean that sense of character to the place that they have chosen to fight over, essentially to claim as theirs. You want it to feel interesting and an individual in its own right.
Yeah, I mean that's how I ran first edition Werewolf. I've not yet run second edition, but I feel there's more support to do what I would have done anyway back in the day. Right. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up, which was before I guess we wrap up, is the other thing, which, I mean, obviously there's lots of powers, and the core thing is that your character has a template that you overlay, and that template that you overlay varies because obviously you can change form. So if you go into full wolf form, you're going to get changes to your stat lines. That's going to give you benefits and so forth. Or if you're kind of the big Garou war form, you're going to have again different benefits and so forth. I think one thing which is also different in this, if you're coming from Chronicles of Darkness or Vampire the Requiem, is your humanity morality stat is definitely about keeping balance. So whereas say in Vampire you kind of want to be at like the 7 or so point, and also as a human you want to keep your integrity high, in Werewolf you don't actually, you want to be somewhere in the middle, because if you go out of whack on that, you're going to lose your internal balance of your wolf spirit and your human side are going to clash against each other, and that's not great for you.
Yeah, I mean that's partly one of the reasons for that is unlike with a human or most entities in the setting, body, mind, and spirit are different things. That's not so much the case for a werewolf. Their spirit and their soul is literally fused into their flesh via the essence that powers them. Their mind is fused into that. They are much more embodied, I guess, if you like, in some ways. And what this means is if they get out of whack spiritually and with their actions, it directly affects their ability to shapeshift, for example, and things like that, because they are fused beings. They're mixed at every level. It's a game about lines and it's a game about blurring those lines, and werewolves very much blur those lines metaphysically. So like you say, harmony has become much more about balance. It's much more about being in the middle. Either extreme can generally be bad, though sometimes they come with their own advantages. And it's one of the more interesting changes I think we made when moving to the second edition was partly the general willingness to play around with these kind of mechanics more in second edition game lines rather than sticking to a single template how it should be.
Yeah.
But Werewolf was quite an interesting one to do with that idea of, we want this to be about balance, we want this to be about harmony, therefore the mechanic actually needs to represent that in some way.
It's quite similar to Changeling the Lost second edition as well, because that is, again, you want to be in the middle, because if you're too human, you can't see the innate magic of the world, and if you're too towards the weird end of the scale, again, yes, you're not even acting in a sane, what other people consider a sane way with how you interact with the world. So that's always good fun. Was there anything else mechanically or interesting systems in second edition? I mean, I think if I remember rightly, unlike say if you play Vampire or something else, you don't have to learn the gifts in a linear fashion.
No. Most gifts, no. There are different types, and one of the categories does work that way, and others don't. There's more freeformness, partly because when I was writing the gifts second edition, one of the bugbears I had with first edition was a lot of the gifts were quite limited, or there was this dot is that dot but slightly better. Because of the core concept we had to change how gifts work, which is splitting them into powers which represent different, again, because of the boundaries, there's the boundaries with the wealth that aren't there. There's no boundary between flesh, spirit, and mind. Their renown, their spiritual might, each of the 5 categories basically powers different types of facet, so you don't have to take them in order. You can take ones that most strongly resonate with your character's spiritual strength. You don't have to, which makes it quite a broad toolbox. As a result, there are a lot of different powers in there.
Yeah. And that's good fun. I mean, it does mean, again, when we come to, like, say, differentiating a pack that has multiple of the same auspice in there, or the lack of a particular auspice, you can still use that toolbox to get the specialisms that you require.
Yeah.
Okay, Mike, I guess we're going to talk quickly about crossover and other books that are out there.
Yeah, as usual, we're gonna speed through crossover because we're running out of time, but Chronicles of Darkness is an expansive world with 11 major monsters to play as, in addition to mortals. And it's important to remember that Werewolf the Forsaken is great by itself, and storytellers never need to add in any other creatures. But the option is always there, and it can definitely serve to enhance your stories and add a little bit more mystery to your chronicle. So a couple of things to highlight. Despite what Beast the Primordial says, we've always theorized here on Darker Days Radio that beasts are probably pretty dreadful for the spirit world. They're these creatures that can kind of creep into the nightmares of mortals, and in the real world also just completely antagonize them, causing horrendous amounts of strife amongst the world, amongst mortals, and also can result in causing chaos in the spirit world. So I think that beasts can make wonderful antagonists for Werewolf the Forsaken. We also have built into World of Darkness Chronicles of Darkness First Edition originally was this initial conflict point around a loci, those places of power between mages, werewolves, and also the Ordo Dracul vampires. And this doesn't mean that they need to fight over them, but it definitely will force some sort of interaction between these different groups. You could have a kind of like a cairn or something like that where all of these three meet up, and maybe you do have some actual philosophical interaction, which could be pretty neat, and can also definitely bring in some interesting politics to the game. So that's really good. And then, because Chris was just talking about changing a little bit, Um, I can see definitely some interesting interactions between the Lost and the Forsaken. I can't see the Gentry crossing over through the hedge. We haven't covered Changeling here yet on Signal Black, but the vile Fey Gentry coming over, or their huntsmen or privateers, that's going to cause a lot of strife and conflict over on this side of the mortal world, which I don't think the Ratha would be a big fan of. And
A bunch of
I can,
Aratha changing the games on the Huntsman would be hilarious.
yeah, that would be
Well,
good.
I mean, it's certainly an area where, yeah, werewolves are either a changeling's very good friend or worst enemy, depending on which side of the line they're on. A group of werewolves who have decided to buddy up with a huntsman because they see a kindred spirit is one of the scariest things a freeholder is going to face. Because you have a bunch of werewolves who don't care about any of the contracts or any of the arrangements or any of the agreements, but equally a werewolf pack who have decided this changeling is theirs and no fucking huntsman is going to have them. The huntsman is going to face a bunch of metaphysically empowered god killers who are designed by eldritch abominations to kill entities like it. So that's not a good place for a huntsman to be.
No.
Yeah. Oh man, that's awesome.
It's pretty great.
I want to play that one shot now. Dang, that's,
we really
that's
need.
great.
I think we really need to play. I think Werewolf has a lot. Again, I think Werewolf has a lot of good crossover elements. Like, because I mean, also we didn't say with mages, you've got the various weird spirits from astral realms, the Akamoth, all of those weird things. Coming over.
The Inferno demons are totally
we totally use the demons from Inferno. They're brilliant.
So weird.
Or the abyssal spirits that come over from mages, messing up massively. That is a massive horror story. Because again, for werewolves, you've got a spirit which is not part of this world in any sense. It's almost akin to an Idigum in that sense. Perhaps wielding powers that don't even follow the rules that they even understand with Idigum. I was going to go with the classic is the God Machine. You've got infrastructure and the angels, and the God Machine is going to change how ley lines and loci are interacting to harvest essence, the very thing that spirits run off, and that's going to cause unknown chaos in both the mortal realm with the occult physics going on and the spirit realm as a reflection of that. So how werewolves deal with that and eventually go no thanks and face down an angel of the God Machine, that would be pretty epic.
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of great crossover options. And then we also just quickly want to highlight that Onyxpath Publishing did put out the 3 Dark Era source books, Dark Eras 1, 2, and the Companion, which provide quite a few historical crossover settings. And for Werewolf the Forsaken in particular, we have Bowery Dogs, which is set in the 1970s crime wave of New York City, where the only people you can trust is your pack family. We've got Sundered World, which is a Neolithic setting pitting post-fall mages against the Forsaken shortly after Father Wolf is killed. So a lot of interesting action right there. And then Forsaken by Rome is another cool one, which is a werewolf game set during the Roman attempts to conquer Germany. And I just want to say that I think that Werewolf has the strongest historical settings of all the stuff in Dark Eras. So definitely some awesome stuff, and some of it can also interact with, say, the Rome settings for vampire as well. So you got a lot of extra support there.
I wrote Sundered World in the first Dark Eras, and it has some very big. It has some big stuff going on for Mage, metaphysics, history-wise, but it has in many ways some bigger stuff for Forsaken in there, in terms of stuff that isn't obviously generally relevant to the modern day, but which you can draw on as a source of mysteries and strangeness. There's some it doesn't answer all the questions of the setting, but it does make some big reveals about the origins of werewolves, about some of the origins of some of the more modern institutions, where they sort of stem from. Another one, it also introduces the Pangeans, which are a new form of not necessarily antagonists, but sometimes. For Dark Eras 2, I worked on the Great War, the Western Front one with Werewolf in there, which is fun, and also wrote the Hunger in the Black Land, which is Middle Kingdom Egypt set, which again has Return of the Pangaean stuff, and also does a lot of crossover with werewolves, Prometheans, and beasts there as well. It's, I think, across that and across the other werewolf settings, like you say, the Rome one in particular, and also I believe sort of Viking era Scandinavia in one of the Wolf and the Raven. The Dark Era's material for werewolf is mostly very strong and builds a lot out from the core stuff in the setting. And I was very lucky that I was allowed to do both Sundered World and Hunger in the Black Land, which do a lot with the metaphysics that underpins werewolf, and some of that was then further developed in one of the supplements for werewolf, Shunned by the Moon, the monster book came out, which has a whole load of new stuff really that partly spins off of what happens in those, but it's for modern games as well. A lot of antagonist material in there.
Cool.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds great. Awesome. So I think that's all we've got to say about werewolf, right? Should we wrap up this episode?
Yeah. Brilliant. So again, Chris, thanks for coming on and chatting about werewolf from your position of great insight into it. It's definitely galvanized me again. I think we need to do a one shot of it at some point, Mike. Awesome. It's definitely be really good fun. Again, if you are watching this, the previous episode about Promethean the Created is now available as in audio on Darker Days Radio podcast. So go over to www.darker-days.org to listen to that and all previous episodes of Signal Black. And of course, you can find all previous episodes of Signal Black available on YouTube if you want to watch it there. If you want to get in contact with us, you can email us at darkdaysradio@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook, Darker Days Radio, and you can find us on Instagram at Darker Days Radio, and of course on Twitter, and as we said, on YouTube. And of course, if you want to discuss more, you can come over to our Discord, where you will find various channels devoted to this and other games such as World of Darkness and the Warhammer RPGs, etc, etc, etc. Any other final comments, Mike?
No, but Chris, do you have any way that people can get in contact with you?
Yes, people can find me on Twitter at Acrozatarim. I'm also on some of the Discord channels for things like the Onyx Path Discords, and round and about in general.
All right, excellent.
Brilliant. Right, well, I think that's everything for now. So with that, we're going to say goodbye and thank you for watching. So goodbye for now.
Yep, goodbye.
This has been an episode of Darker Days Radio. Special thanks to Occam's Laser for the intro, outro, and new bumper music from their hit album, 9 Circles. Check out the rest of their work at occamslaser.bandcamp.com.